That's right.
Peace and power. Once again, this is the Panther 48. We're coming at you today with our fourth installment of the Introduction to Politics class. We got Brother E, who we call our Minister of Information Emeritus, calling out of Florida.
Power to the people.
We have Brother Robert Ward Williams, the Chief of Staff of the San Diego Black Panther Party, and who we call the Panther 48's Chairman Emeritus, called out of California.
Help all the people, folks.
And we got myself, Brother Syke, calling out of Texas. The Panther 48, again, as I always explain, is not another Panther faction. It is not a Panther organization that someone can join, but the Panther 48 is a consolidation of long-term community activists and revolutionaries who have decided to come together to conceptualize Panther ideology and Panther ideas for the continuation of these concepts and ideas, so that people won't be stuck reinventing the wheel and trying to rediscover fire. We want to make sure that these ideas can be passed on and that people can get the proper education needed to liberate, uplift, and teach and educate and empower the community. That is the purpose of the Panther 48. Today, we're going to continue building on our introduction to politics. Right now, we're dealing with definitions. I'm gonna start off with two basic definitions, and then I'm gonna give us a little recap of what we've already talked about so far. Then Brother Ward is gonna give you some a nice understanding of some very important definitions when it comes to Black liberation struggle, and then Brother E is gonna backdoor that and give you some more definitions that we can use in our lexicon for understanding the political terms, political ideologies that deal with this struggle. Now, two basic definitions that we have to define when we're dealing with an introduction to politics is government and politics themselves. Now, government, a basic general definition for government is this: government is a set of rules and institutions that people set up so that they can function together as a unified society. Now, one of the things you got to remember that a quote unquote government has no physical body. It is not a physical thing, but it's a construct, it's an idea, because all of us are individuals. We're all individual people. And if me, E, and Ward decide that we're going to live together, then we're going to create certain rules, certain policies, and certain institutions in our living that's going to help us function properly together. We got to come to an understanding. That understanding that a group of people come to in order to live unified is government. We're going to come up with a way to defend ourselves. We're going to come up with a way to feed ourselves. We're going to come up with a way to make sure that we keep our living environments clean, all of that. Those become the institutions that keep a government running. Now, I'm talking about it from a microcosmic standpoint, but it could be understood from a macrocosmic standpoint. Now, when me, Brother E, and War come to sit down and we have our differences of opinion on things that we feel like, this is Brother War may feel like we need to invest in baseball bats to make sure we defend our home. Brother E may feel that we need to invest in spears to defend our home. I may feel we just need to pray to defend our home. When we come to these, when we have a seat and have to discuss and debate with each other about what we're going to do to make sure the defense for our home is taken care of, me, E, and War are engaging in politics, because politics, and I'm gonna give you a written definition. Politics is the process in which we decide how power is distributed in a society. Politics, on a more simple level, is figuring out who gets what, when, why, and where. That's what politics is. We're sitting up and we're discussing policy, how we're going to defend our home, how we're going to make sure we stay fed, whose responsibility it is to clean the home on which day. These things are politics. And we believe that it's extremely important for the people to have a functional definition of politics and political terms in order to be able to make proper decisions in the governing of their lives. Because one of the things you have to understand is this: if you don't understand politics and if you don't participate in politics, you end up being ruled by your inferiors. Somebody else is making decisions for you. Somebody else is governing you. So you have to understand what's going on, and you have to put your hand in. You have to take control of your own life. You have to empower yourself. These things are very important. Now, in order for us to move on and get deep into this discussion, let's go into some of these definitions. I'm gonna turn the mic over to Brother War, and Brother War is gonna give you an understanding and a quick breakdown of terms like Black Power, all power to the people, and Black nationalism. Brother War.
All right. I would first say the term Black Power that most people are familiar with actually was coined, so to speak, in the 60s by a brother named Willie Mukasa Ricks. Willie Ricks was basically working with Stokely Carmichael, Martin Luther King Jr. doing the SNCC organizing, as well as what took place from that standpoint in Laos County, Alabama. They formed the Black Panther Party, and the Black Panther Party was basically working on Black rights for Black people and empowerment across a county that was basically 70 to 80% Black, but controlled by white people. From that standpoint, the term Black Power was a shortened version of what was really phrased, which was Black Power for Black people. So in referencing to saying Black Power and Black Power for Black people, what was identified is the fact that it even goes back to what Syke was saying in regards to politics, is that Black people had to be in control of their community. Black people had to basically develop, define, and be able to defend what it is that we deal with. So Black Power, in essence, is the kinetic energy and having the ability to control and define your destiny. You know, just like it says within the basic 10-point platform, we want freedom. We want to be able to practice self-determination. From that standpoint, Black Power is actually the kinetic energy involved in practicing self-determination. So first aspect I would say that has to be identified with Black Power is realizing that if we are not in control of our way of life, then we are not exercising Black Power. What we're exercising is a form of, like Syke was saying, inferiority, as well as basically being controlled and manipulated and moved by something other than yourself. So Black Power is recognizing your ability and your right and your accountability to control and design your life as best fit for Black people. Do y'all want to add anything else to that?
True indeed, true indeed. We appreciate the definition, brother, the breakdown. I'm going to read a definition, and most of these, especially dealing with Black definition for Black political terms, I get from the BLA political dictionary. But it says that Black Power is an ideology that proposes that Black people mobilize their political and economic resources to compel respect for their rights and to uplift their own condition. A person following this ideology will spend their money with businesses that create jobs for Black people and utilize their resources toward the development of the Black community. Now, a good book for reading, as Brother Ward just brought the brother name up, good book to read to understand this political concept is this book here that was wrote by Stokely Carmichael and Charles Hamilton, Black Power and the Politics of Liberation in America. So that's a good book to read to understand that concept. Brother E, you want to say anything before Brother Ward move to the next definition?
No, sir.
All right, Brother Ward, it's on you.
All right, I would say now when we talk about Black nationalism, basically what Black nationalism is kind of goes into what we already said within Black Power. But to emphasize Black nationalism, what we have to talk about is the fact that this is about Black people recognizing, especially in the modern day time like now, we have to recognize our need to circulate and can control how our communities operate. So Black nationalism, in essence, is us controlling the wealth in our community, defining and determining what the wealth is in our community, and having the ability to grow our community based upon the circulation of the dollar, based upon the recognition of land value, based upon the recognition of building industries, building businesses, building schools, community. And from that standpoint, Black nationalism is us defining and creating our brand of empowerment in our communities. So when we talk about being a Black nationalist, we're basically saying that we want to control and spend the dollar amongst ourselves. And as we spend the dollar amongst ourselves, and as we create resources and control those resources amongst ourselves, then what we are doing is empowering ourselves as Black people. And recognizing Black nationalism means that first and foremost, you see to it that your people that are like you and that are of your same background are the ones that are benefiting from the wealth of your community. So if you're going to exercise Black nationalism, it's basically about making sure that the accountability in terms of our spending, in terms of where we place our values and how we live amongst one another is defined by Black people, is in control of, in essence, by Black people. So I would just simply sum that up by saying Black nationalism is recognizing that we must do for self first and foremost, and we must operate and circulate that exercising of spending resources and monetary value amongst ourselves first and foremost. And we keep that in our control. And by doing that, what we do is we help to empower and define our communities. By doing that, what we do is we show and deploy that we have the ability to work and trade and commune and deal within our own resource capabilities. So in dealing with Black nationalism on that front, we define who we are and we control who we are. So our value is strictly placed on our level of being able to operate within our resources and operate on a level to where we can create, define, and deal with the development of those resources. Any other statement?
To add to what Brother Ward just explained to us, two great books. I'm gonna always give you a resource to go check out, because I believe it's very important that people do their own research. Don't just listen to us and believe us. That's how Black people got in the position that they in now. They listening to people without doing any real research and trying to understand for themselves and using your own rationality and your own mind. But two great books to read to understand Black nationalism deeper and the history and development of it. One of them is called Classical Black Nationalism. It's called Classical Black Nationalism from American Revolution to Marcus Garvey by Wilson Jeremiah Moses. And the other one, I love this second book, Modern Black Nationalism from Marcus Garvey to Louis Farrakhan by William L. Vanderburg. Now, the reason why there are two books, because in classical Black nationalism, this is the basic premise of it. Black people felt like that they would never get treated fairly in America. Never gonna happen. So Black people had to create their own nation. Therefore, Black nationalism literally means to create a Black nation. And so classical Black nationalists believe that Black people needed their own nation. Some propagated the ideal of going back to Africa and taking certain countries in Africa and creating their own Black nation. Others believed in taking separate states in America and creating a separate Black nation separated from America. So that was the basic ideal of classical Black nationalism. Modern Black nationalism dealt with the idea of understanding that the Black community itself was somewhat like a neo-colony, and that colony needed to liberate itself from the empire's influence, and then Black people, as Ward was just explaining, needed to start taking control of the politics, the education, the economics, and everything that dealt with their community, not separating the state and not necessarily going back to Africa. And that could be a idea that could be visited later, but first taking control and dealing with the problems and the issues in the community that they're in right now. That's essentially what modern Black nationalism was.
I just want to say I never really cared for the phrase power to the people. I never really liked that phrase. It's too kumbaya for me. You know, it's all good, all power to the people. Okay, whatever, y'all go do whatever you got to do. My concern is one particular piece of that people and power, and that's, you know, that particular clique. So, I mean, it like I said, it's okay for the kumbaya, for, you know, for explaining it to others and all of that, but there's a certain type of softness to it, a certain type of integration almost, you know, making it pleasant for other people. And, that's never been my shtick. Fuck them is, yeah, power to the people to explain it kind of a way and make everybody comfortable. When we say Black Power, we're just saying this piece of power to the people. When in reality, yeah, that's for y'all to feel good about and do with what you want. Because if we break it down, really to say power to the people is it's kind of irrelevant, because the only ones that really need to hear that is us. Yellow people got power, to whatever degree they got some power. Brown folk, Latino cats, they got some power. However they use it, to whatever degree, they have some sense of power, cultural, all of that good stuff. They can paint murals and take over entire communities, and it's copacetic, and people just kind of get out of the way and let it happen. Of course, white people, that goes without even saying. So all power to the people is kind of bleh to me. It's not, if we're really talking about us, it doesn't really have a usefulness in our lexicon other than to help those who, white-minded Black folks who we're trying to ease it into and get them to feel good about it or less threatened by the idea of Black power. So it's a kind of a placebo, or you put the medicine in the peanut butter or whatever and feed it to the dog or whatever. So yeah, that's my piece.
You gave your piece on all power to the people before you let them break it down.
I bet.
So let me backtrack on that real quick.
Yeah, I thought you mentioned that earlier. I swore I heard you say all power to the people.
No,
he did. He did Black Power, and then he did nationalism.
Let me say this.
You waiting on that all power to the people, though.
I sure was.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So let me say this in regards to all power to the people. Basically, all power to people is the recognition that the people need to realize that they ultimately have the power, and that we as a people must be in control of the social, political, economic aspects of how we are being governed. So in saying that as well, it also goes into the fact that the people themselves have to recognize the importance of building community, the importance of building unity and operation amongst themselves as a people. Whereas when we think about, Black nationalism, to agree, it's basically Black people being in control of their spending, being in control of the flow of everything within their community. But you still, in a sense, are talking about individuals that are working together to build, whereas all power to the people, you're recognizing that as the people, in dealing with any government, no matter what government it is, the people themselves have to still maintain a certain level of control in terms of how they're being governed collectively. So all power to the people is knowing that when you exchange freedoms for civil liberties, then to a certain degree, what you're doing is stripping some of your people power. So all power to the people, as that applies, is knowing that at any given time, the people themselves have to be able to recognize the need to mass assemble and come together collectively in order to make change, address change, and build upon the people's power, or the mass power to control any given situation. And I would say calibrate a given situation, because what we find, all across the world, regardless of the political power, the political structure, is that at certain times, mass governing does create situations to where the people when it trickles down to the actual community, trickles down to the actual location, oftentimes find themselves being in certain situations of oppression. So all power to the people is addressing the fact that it is the people themselves that must make sure that a ruling class does not strip them completely of their ability to exercise and operate, any given situation, to where they don't lose their ability to have power and to exercise power. So kind of like what Brody was getting at, as it applies to Black people, that's where we go into Black power for Black people. So yeah, all power to the people is just the overall aspect of the people recognizing that they must collectively come together to emphasize and control the way politics and government happens, amongst them. But then when you get down to the specifics, that's what we talk about, what Black Power means for Black people. Any more comments on that one?
Two good books to read to get a deeper understanding of that term or that phrase and why it was used is Huey P. Newton's Revolutionary Suicide. And one of the books that I always talk about when dealing with trying to study and understand Panther history and ideology is The Black Panther Speaks by Philip Forner. I think those are two good books to read to understand. Now, the three principles that Brother Ward just explained and broke down deals with what needs to be established for Black people when he explained Black power, Black nationalism, and all power to the people. So we're dealing with a physical, what needs to be built and created physically. I think, in my opinion, what E is fit to explain in the three principles or the three political terms that E will explain deals with what Black people need to understand mentally in order to be able to get to the creation of that physical. Go ahead, brother E.
So African-centered thought or Afrocentrism is, Europeans have this hierarchy, and the world, in fact, has submitted to this hierarchy that European culture is supreme and absolute and the tippy top, and has marginalized everybody else. The idea that, you see sisters that have a particular look, especially from the continent or even from here. But in just kind of as an example, Europeans will look at certain sisters and say, oh, she's exotic. Whereas we would look at a sister and say, yeah, that's just a sister. That's a Black woman, that's an African woman, because that's our center, that's regular for us. If you go into a Chinese person's home, and I've had this sort of thing happen before. You go into a Chinese person's home, they've got pictures of Chinese folks and they're writing, the calligraphy style writing on the walls. Maybe they're playing music from their land, and we don't question that. We go into a Latino or Mexican, Puerto Rican or whatever home, they're speaking Spanish, they're cooking food that reflects, using tortillas or beans and bright certain different herbs and whatnot from their home, and we don't question that. But I've had conversations with people or had people in my home, and they see the murals on the wall of Malcolm and Ox and Osar and Aset, and I may say something in Swahili, and they'll ask, why do you talk so much about Africa? Why is it so much Africa this, Africa that? The idea that someone who's an African would speak about Africa or have pictures that reflect Africa values and mythologies and ideas and form is foreign to us. It's odd. An Afrocentric mind puts us at the center where we should be, not in the sense that Europeans have done it to subjugate others, but to simply center ourselves and give ourselves the ability to look at the world through our own eyes, so that we interpret things in terms of what's best for us first. If we're in an African home, there should be African things around, some degree of that reflection. You go into a Filipino person's home, you take your shoes off, you do certain things because that's part of their culture. We don't do that. But an African-centered mind will place ourselves at the center so that it just becomes a natural reflection, and you can in fact walk into their home and you will see that. So Afrocentricity is simply putting African people at the center of the conversation. When we talk about slavery and the Ma'afa and all of that, we don't talk about it in terms of what Europeans did about it. Europeans went to Africa and took Africans and brought them over here. The conversation becomes, these folks came to our land and took us and brought us and moved us. Just slight, subtle nuances in the things that we say reflect our perspective. And an African-centered perspective will put us back at the center so that we can see the world from our vantage point, interpret the world as ourselves being players, as opposed to being those pawns on the game board being moved around by someone else. It's an empowerment based on an African sensibility.
Well, one of the I keep giving references real quick. I can't give a reference without saying the book by the same title. It's called Afrocentricity by Malefi Asante. If I'm correct, he is the one that coined the phrase Afrocentricity, but not necessarily the idea. For a beginner, though, I would say a great book to read, and I always say that people need to read this book is From the Broader File by Anthony T. Broader, and he don't use the term Afrocentricity, but the book gives you a great understanding of what Brother Eva just explaining and breaking down on those concepts and those ideas. Another one for the more developed reader, for the person that has a deeper understanding of these concepts, is these books here, Volume 1 and Volume 2, When the World Was Black by Supreme Understanding. And the brother goes into the science. He really builds on the science and explains how the world was truly black. And I think those books would deal with the concepts of Pan-Africanism too, because he explains how black people was the original people of the planet and how black people got spread all over the planet Earth. And like I say, he deals with the science on that. Anybody else have anything to say for brother? He moves to the next turn.
Yeah, I do, and I just want to talk about one of the words Brother E used, because I want to make sure our listening audience understands this. That word exotic. I want to say this, and I hate that word. I'm gonna tell you why. Because that word itself has nothing to do with black people. That is purely a concept that is European based in terms of identifying something that you want to conquer or have conquest towards. Typically, when you think about somebody saying, "Ooh, that's exotic," what basically goes through their mind is that they want to attach or grab or conquer that item or that thing and have it as a show centerpiece to be able to basically reference it back to their thirst. So exotic, why black folks don't use the word, wouldn't naturally use the word exotic, because that basically just means that you have been untainted. To say exotic is basically giving recognition that, oh, this is a different culture that hadn't yet been tapped or conquered by Europeans, or a different culture that hadn't yet been influenced by Europeans, and so it's so vastly different. So to look at something as being exotic is basically giving credence to it needs to be conquered, or you need to extract it so that it can be used as your centerpiece, or something that you can flaunt, that you came into exposure or contact with. So know that a lot of the things that go on when it applies to especially definitions from European explanation is based upon everything else being inferior in their eyes, or everything else being of value that has to be defined first and foremost by them. So we just need to be aware of that. One other thing, a lot of cultures, including some African cultures, do take their shoes off before they enter the home. And that's because you do not want to allow external influences into your home, which is supposed to be your sacred temple. So I do want to say that.
Don't be getting all sensitive and shit. Don't be all sensitive. Now, thank you.
I'm done.
Next turn.
So Pan-Africanism, if a corrupt government in Nigeria hooks up with a corrupt government in Kenya for trade, for military, whatever, that's Pan-Africanism. Pan-Africanism is best understood as a process within a process. It was something that African people, before Europeans intervened, Africa was on track to becoming essentially what we're led to believe the European Union is supposed to be a unified whole, maintaining its cultural independence and flavor in various areas, but as a whole, both on the continent and globally, African people recognizing that we're all the same people. Now, the two corrupt governments, as I said, it's a process. So if those two corrupt governments are reaching across and interacting, that's Pan-Africanism technically. But as a process, because they're corrupt in whatever form that takes, has to outgrow that, and that Pan-Africanism has to develop and move along. The idea of Pan-Africanism is extremely simple. All African people are the same people. Whether we're on the continent, whether we're in Australia, whether we're in Russia, the US, the Caribbean, wherever we are, we're still African people. And recognizing that and developing ways to express that and use it to our advantage is the process of Pan-Africanism. And it's a natural outgrowth of what Ward spoke about earlier, or the idea, the concept that all of us touched on, I guess, earlier. Black nationalism. Most every Black nationalist, prominent Black nationalist that we acknowledge, has grown from Black nationalism into Pan-Africanism. Martin Delany, often cited as the father of Black nationalism, but he was also a Pan-Africanist because he worked to get the whole idea of Liberia and the Back to Africa movement moved along because he understood that connection. Whereas at that time, it was easy to understand the connection because he grew up with people speaking in the tongue and telling stories of back in Africa, how we used to do things, whereas we don't have that same attachment right away that we can identify with. Stokely Carmichael, who wrote Black Power, would become like a leading figure within the idea of Pan-Africanism, grew from a Black nationalist, Black Power and all of that, to Pan-Africanism. Never left Black nationalism. It was still a core, still a basis for that growth. It was still a seed, if you will, for him to grow into this tree of Pan-Africanism and change his name to Kwame Ture and move back to the continent and all of those things. But Malcolm went from Black nationalism with the nation and all of that, and in his trips to Africa would become more of a Pan-Africanist, developing the OAAU and reaching out to leaders on the continent to begin developing something across. We weren't ready for it. He was, and a few others along with him. But as a people, we weren't ready because we weren't a part of that process that grows from Black nationalism into Pan-Africanism, as often happens. Those who are out front jump and make that connection, and the masses are not yet primed, set up, ready, educated to move along that path. So Pan-Africanism is a natural moving along from the physical identification of being Black. This is Black culture, this is we Black people, Black, moving beyond the shores of the US and saying that our history doesn't start with slavery, but our history starts before that, which puts us in Africa, which boom, okay, now I'm a Pan-Africanist. So it's a very easy path to see when you strip down all of the big words and all the other things that we attach to, make things more complicated. Seeing that it is a natural outgrowth of Black nationalism is this idea of Pan-Africanism, that African people around the world are one single people, just as the Black folks in your hood are one people. Pan-Africanism is just, a global sort of Black nationalism.
True indeed. I think Brother E gave a great explanation on that. There ain't really a lot that need to be given to it. A great book for anybody to read to understand that growth and that progression that he talked about is the autobiography of Malcolm X, as told to Alex Haley. And you could see that growth and that development in Malcolm. And one of the things Malcolm said, one of the debates or the arguments he used to love to use was a kitten does not have babies in the oven, and we call them biscuits. They're still kittens, they're still cats. And he said an African, no matter where they have children, they're still Africans. He explained the concept, no matter where you see a Chinese at anywhere on the planet, you still gonna call them a Chinese. no matter where you say a Mexican at, anywhere on the planet, you still gonna call them a Mexican. But he said the black people are the only people that are no longer Africans because they were born in America, because they were born somewhere else, other than Africa. And as he said, Pan-Africanism in its most simple understanding is understanding that black people all over the planet Earth, 196,949,070 square miles, wherever you find them, are Africans. That's that basic understanding. The word pan means all. And that's another thing that Malcolm said. I think he said it, I can't remember if he said it in the autobiography or if it was in Malcolm X on Afro-American history, or it might be in both. But he said that what black people need is Pan-Africanism, the way Jews have quote unquote pan-Jewry. That's what he called it. And he said that understanding that we are the same people. I was in a conversation with a brother years ago, and it was funny. It was around the time when Rihanna's career blew up. And the brother, I can't remember how we got there, but he was debating and arguing with me, telling me that Rihanna was not black. You know, I called her a black woman. He said, she ain't black. I said, she's not black. How is she not black? He said, because she's from Barbados. And I say, so just because she's from Barbados, that means she's not black? He said, yeah, she's Bajan. She ain't black. She's from Barbados. And then I asked him, I said, well, what is a black person then? I mean, how do you define a black person? What makes a black person black? What I don't understand that. You know, and do you think that black people originally come from America? Is that what you believe? All black people all over the planet are where they are for the same exact reason. They're all over the earth for the same exact reason. Black people are in Haiti for the same reason that black people are in America. The only difference is they was enslaved by a slave. One was enslaved by a slave master that spoke French, and another one was enslaved by a slave master that spoke English. That's the only difference. That's the only difference. We're dispersed over the entire world for the same exact reason. But that's all I wanted to add to that. Oh, and as I showed these two books to understand that concept, this brother builds on it deeply in these books, in this When the World Was Black. And he shows you, he shows you who the original people of the planet Earth are and how the original people of the planet Earth became the different variations of mankind and how we got spread all over the planet. But go ahead, brother.
Hey, let me jump in real quick and make one point that I want to just emphasize, just to take people back to why Pan-Africanism in recognizing that black people all over the planet are that we have to unite comes into play as a result of conquest, as a result of this whole exotic idealism. The deal is we were taught to be individuals. We were taught to lose our connection with the continent. We were taught to lose our connection with being one with the planet. As a result of that, basically what we're talking about is the weaponization of divide and conquer. Divide and conquer has become the way of life, has become what we identify ourselves with. So we went from being African to being African American, or just being American, so to speak. So the idea here was to divide the African people from across the continent and make us not identify with our connection with one another. So through conquering and dividing, basically, they tricked us to pin ourselves against each other and not look at that united connection, which to me, in essence, even goes back to why when I think about all power to the people, I'm thinking about it from the standpoint of Pan-Africanism. I'm thinking about it from the standpoint that all Africans must unite. So we must have all power to the people. So oftentimes, when you talk to certain Africans and throughout the diaspora, they may not identify themselves as black. I've heard that a lot from certain Africans say that I don't consider myself black. They deal with their national identity. But Pan-Africanism is basically us recognizing, regardless of our national identity, regardless of what specific African culture we identify with, that it is imperative that all of us as African people throughout the diaspora connect and find ways to build amongst each other. So that Black nationalism identifies and comes together through different various forms of Pan-Africanism, so that all of us benefit from each other and not allow external forces to come in and bloodsuck and constantly divide us. So I just wanted to point that out.
And that's a good point that Brother Ward just made, because even the division of those ideas create division amongst those who are supposed to be those who are trying to educate and liberate the community itself. And we got to stop allowing ourselves to get caught in those traps, because I see my political ideology as being Black power. I see myself as being a Black nationalist, a Pan-Africanist. I have an Afrocentric thought process, and I see no conflict at all in any of those. Matter of fact, I don't see how you could have one without the other. I don't know how you could be a Pan-Africanist without being a Black nationalist. I don't know how you could be a Black nationalist without having an Afrocentric thought process. I don't know how that could be possible in my understanding. I don't know how you think that you could ever get true Black political power without having these ideas. I don't know how, or even being able to identify who the hell Black people are and what power means to us. I don't know how these things could exist without each other. But go ahead, brother.
Well, I'm gonna clarify. I'm finna spank you real quick. But two examples before. You mentioned Malcolm. And I wish we could have gotten, I wish it had the clarity, the significance before having lost real contact with the brother to get his story down. Because I think as a contemporary, somebody that we actually know and experience is a great example, and that's Brother David. There was a time when, shaking his foundation of being an African and dogging out just being a Black nationalist and all of that. Y'all remember, and you know what I'm referring to, messed his foundation up to the point where there was major conflict amongst us. And having seen this cat grow to a point where at one time he was digging in and researching the how-tos of repatriating to the continent, back to Africa. So this cat went from a gangster to a gangster Black nationalist to a Pan-Africanist. And I say, and I reference him because, again, that's somebody that we know. It's not Malcolm that we read in the book, and that's great. Not taking nothing away from Malcolm at all. And the story, it's an excellent book to get an understanding. But having that real, tangible human being that we broke bread with, that we took road trips with, that we argued with, that we love and respect, having that right there in our midst is a wonderful example for us to, and like I said, I wish we could have gotten his story at least, verbally told to pass along as our sort of Malcolm X in a way to pass along. Rashida and Taimba, they remember David. So, having that in their heads would have been a great thing. Iran and Kate may remember David, but, having that as a tangible would be a wonderful thing. And also, Richard Pryor, when he went to Africa, he talked about it in one of his stand-up routines after he came back. And he tells the story of how he stood in the hotel. And I love the story, how he stood in the hotel window and he looked out, sitting in the middle of Africa, to do a show. He was at the hotel and he looked out and he said he didn't see any niggas. He had this revelation, this epiphany that we're all the same people. This is me, I'm them, and there's no niggas around. There's a totally different vibe and energy when you are connected, whether it's physically, whether it's, through study, whether it's watching videos, whatever it is, when you start to connect and you have that connection, there's a different vibration that begins with this movement toward Pan-Africanism. And insofar as Rihanna, see, he went away now. Rihanna is not Black. And we keep convoluting the terms African and Black, and they're not the same thing. Rihanna, Black has to be understood as a culture. Black has to be understood as an expression of Africanness, but it doesn't include everybody. She didn't come up in this culture. There are things that she's connected to because of the culture that she did come up in. And this is anybody, not just her, but anybody that's come up primarily in the islands has a different cultural perspective, because the Breaker Islands, as they were called, Barbados, Puerto Rico, all of those places, the implementation of this oppression was different for those Africans there than it has been for us here. In those countries, in those islands, they were allowed to play. The rules weren't quite as tight. They were able to sing and dance in some of their own language. They were able to develop certain things that we couldn't develop because they developed a different identity based on the particular oppression. Haitians ain't black. They didn't come up in this black expression. And when they come here, you'll notice that, or I've noticed, because there are a lot of Haitians here. Even just, I've worked, there were like 13 Haitians at this one place that I worked. There were like 13 of them. And when they talk to each other, you will swear up and down when they're going back and forth in French. You think somebody's fixing to get shot because of the level of just, they just add each other. If that was, us in the street somewhere talking to somebody, it's something to break out. We need to go ahead and bounce, get out of here. But 30 seconds later, that ha 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 ha. But that's the culture that they came from, has that expression where they talk to each other like that. You can't talk to each other like that in this situation, in our culture, because it means something different. And I've seen Sight, I've seen other cats. When you get to a certain tone, when a man gets to a certain tone in his voice, when he's talking to you, there's a problem. These cats use that tone almost exclusively when they were talking to each other. So the culture that they came up with is their culture. Black culture is the result of our Africanness reacting to the European oppression in this country. So I would have to say, in my opinion, she's not black, because black is a culture and she's coming in from a different culture. And not to say that she shouldn't be welcomed in, because she's an African, but recognizing that she, to a certain degree, is like, somebody from the Zulu nation going to visit somebody in the Ashanti nation. There's going to be crossovers where things match up, but there are going to be things that are different. So when she comes over, that's a sister, what's up, blah, 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 and all of that. But whereas she eats a certain food that we've never heard of, whereas she may speak a language or a dialect we've never heard of. Those are the cultural differences. So she's not, in my head, technically black, because black is a culture. It's not a race. African, she's African all day. But that, I would kind of have to be in between you and the cat that you noted in your example, somewhere in between. Both of y'all are right.
You can't be in between that guy. That guy was an idiot.
Well, but still, but you can
learn.
We're
talking about culture as you're talking about. That guy believes that she is of a completely different race.
Right, and I get that, but that's what I was going to say. That he doesn't understand culture and race and all of that. But at the same time, we have to use the right terminology. You're wrong, brother. She's an African. I'm an African. Blah blah blah. But you're right, brother. She ain't black because she comes from a different culture. So
now,
he still kind of had a point.
Now let me pull the switch back out.
Pull it out.
And spank you a little bit, and we're gonna get back to politics, right? Because we could do this would be a good one in itself, because I believe that black is a great righteous term for defining our people, and I'm gonna tell you why. And you're speaking of it from a cultural perspective, but even in America, we can see different cultures that have came up on different coasts. There's a different culture in California than there is in New York.
No doubt.
Same black people, same descendants of Africans, you'll see a completely different culture. In New York, if you notice, a lot of the rappers, a lot of the movement, a lot of the conversation is influenced heavily by the Nation of Gods and Earth and the Nation of Islam, that 5% culture. Even when a lot of time we was young and we used to hear the rappers talking, they'd be like, yo, son, yo, B.
What up, God?
We didn't understand what that was and what that was referencing. We thought they were calling you my male child, not understanding that they were referring to the sun in the sky that shines light because of that 5% of influence on them. Then you go to the West Coast and you'll see a heavy Blood and Crip, basically Black Panther influence on the Street Brothers in that environment. So you'll see those different cultures, even though we're the same people. Now, black, we know this, we all know this. Egypt, original name was Kemet. And the term Kemet literally means the black land. The term literally means that. The Kim was the symbol or the pictogram that was used to for the word Kim was a piece of black land or black coal, which how the people identified themselves as those people that came from that black land. Ethiopia, even though it's originally a Greek word, but the word Ethiops or Ethiopia literally means land of the burnt faces. It would just literally means, and we all know that anything that's burnt is black, becomes black. So we see this referencing of ourselves as black in ancient history. Now I understand the principle you're dealing with when you're talking about the different cultures from Dominican Republic, from our people in the Dominican Republic, our people in Brazil, our people in Africa, or even our people in America. Hell, there are more black people, as you prefer to call Africans, in these islands, in the Caribbean islands, in these places than there are here. We got to remember there were thousands taken there. The first ship that brought black people here was only 8. It was only 8 that got off the boat here. You know what I'm saying? And that's one of the things I was telling that brother. You know, he was of the misunderstanding. And the cold thing is, and I'm going to give you the mic back. Now, when you did this, you made me remember more and more our conversation. You brought it back. I recalled it. This fool's name was black. His name was black. He called himself Clack because he was a Crip. But his name was black because he was darker than a million midnights. This guy was. And this guy was arguing with me, trying to tell me the women that played for Brazil, not from the perspective of what you're saying, the women that played on the team from Brazil was not black. He was trying to tell me this because he didn't believe that we was all of the same race. He don't think that an Italian woman is white. He don't think it. She's not white. She's an Italian. And I'm dealing with, and we all know, you are right about this from this perspective. We all know that originally we didn't define ourselves in these color terms. This is something that came up later. We defined ourselves by the continents that people came from. I mean, even you'll see it in certain movies. That's one of the discussions that I had with the brother, and I explained to him. Look at the movie Gladiator, and Maximus. Maximus was a Roman general. I said, but they call him Spaniard. What do you think that means? And you know, when we hear a Spaniard, an uneducated person hear Spaniard, they thinking Spanish or Mexican. He wasn't no Mexican. He was from Spain. Spain is a place in Europe. You know what I'm saying? Where the Spanish language originally came from. So that's why he was called Spaniard. They called people by the lands that they came from. But and we still do it. If you in prison, you walk in prison, they call you by the land you come from. Look out Fort Worth. Look out D-Town. Look out A-Town. We still do that. It's still a part of who we are as a people. We still reference the land that people come from.
Most definitely, and that would lead us back to identifying and referencing one another as African. And in this day and age, in this terminology, Black serves as a cultural reference, the way that Zulu and all of those cultures reference their cultures. And I agree, North, East Coast, West Coast, those are microcultures. We still identify on a cultural level things like rap. East Coast, West Coast, sounds different, but it's still rap. It's still flowed out of the same experience. It's still differences in that experience, but that cultural experience having its own influences along the way, as you reference the Panthers versus the nations of the gods of the earth and all, or the Nation of Islam and all of those things on the East Coast. But even those influences came out of a reaction to that same type of oppression in this country. So yeah, those are microcultures or micro subcultures within the subculture of Black. So for the sake of identifying our particular perspective and our reaction to our oppression, using black as a cultural reference makes more sense as a part of the process. You know, because we can go back and yes, we identified as you know, land of the blacks, or Akibalan, you know, Taim's middle name means the land of the blacks. Um, 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 but it doesn't really speak to our experience and our expression. But like I said, we could go back and just say, well, you know, we're human and start from there, but nobody's ready for that. So as a part of the process, for me, it makes more sense as a cultural expression. Blackness is what this is. So, and things like, you know, Ethiopia and all that being a reaction to, or that being somebody else's reaction to us. So it's still, you know, the whole landmass and everything. If we're going to attach ourselves to land and reference each other to where you came from, you know, hey, European man, that's an African over there. And so, you know, that fits right in with what you were saying. So, you know, you kind of, you were spanking me, you kind of hit yourself on the leg.
No. What it is, I'm able to see where you're on point, where I can understand your point of view, but you just hit yourself on the leg because you just said Ethiopia was a reaction of somebody else to us. So is Africa, because the oldest root of the word Africa is Afri, which came from an Arabic word which meant sunny. So they called our land the sunny land, the place of the sun. So therefore that term, that's the oldest that we can find that term being used, Afri, Afri, which meant sunny. The Phoenician people called it I can't remember the name, but it was something similar to the Arabic word, which meant the same exact thing. And we was always called the children of the sun because in ancient times, ancient people referenced the sun as the most powerful thing that they was able to lay eyes on. So it was the greatest symbol of God's power. And since that element shined brightest in Africa, then they believed that those people that it shined brightest on had to be God's favorite. So we was called the children of the sun, you know. So maybe we should be called the sunny people. But
no doubt.
Let's continue with this political education. We got one more term you gotta break down for us, for the listening audience.
Okay, and this is like my favorite. A lot of times people get caught up and confused and think that Karen on a video calling somebody a nigger is racism, which is not. It might be, it's her opinion, you know, it might be foolishness or bigotry or prejudice, but it's not racism, because racism, like capitalism, like socialism, like any of these isms, is a system. And it's a system based on RAC, race, racial subjugation, essentially, which the only system based on racial subjugation in the known universe is white supremacy. So, you know, Malcolm's that clip that we played a lot of times, where he's talking about you change your thought patterns, change your attitudes, your behavior pattern, and all of that. Europeans had this thought pattern, this idea, this reaction of white supremacy, and they changed their got into some action and changed their behavior patterns and all of that based on the idea that white people are supreme. Racism is all of the institutions and when I say institutions, we're talking about schools, systems of government, systems of finance. All of these are based on keeping themselves propped up in a superior position based on the idea that they're supreme, which is why all white folks are racist, because they're on, by default, no fault of their own. And, you know, this generation, they didn't start it, but they benefit from having been placed in a position of supremacy. This whole idea of white privilege that they're throwing around is becoming meaningless real quick. It means nothing anymore. But the fact of the matter is, they benefit from this system, period. So they are on the beneficial side of racial subjugation. They're not being subjugated. They might be broke. They might, you know, they might get wrapped up and commit crimes and be treated like a criminal, blah, blah, blah. But at the end of the day, they started out, which you got to be really pathetic to be somebody in a system designed to make sure that you succeed, and yet you fail. They still benefit from a system that props them up and gives them a head start by subjugating everybody else to the idea that they should get a head start, which is what racism is. So it's this codified system of racial subjugation designed to keep primarily us, the opposite end of the spectrum, to keep us in our place. I don't know what else more to say, other than, like I said, for me, the biggest problem with understanding racism, white supremacy, is that people identify it with somebody being called a nigger. You know, the Klan ain't racism, the neo-Nazis ain't racism. Racism is a school system that teaches you nothing about who you are. Racism is a system where any white woman, as you know, we've seen the video where the white chick is in, I think, Central Park, and she threatens to call the police on her brother and tell them, you know, I'm a white woman and this black man's bothering me. The fact that she knows to say, you know, to identify the racial features of the people involved tells you right there that she understands. Even in the back of her mind, she's probably one of the biggest liberals, bleeding heart liberals in the world. But she knows in the back of her mind that she can play that trump card, no pun intended, that she is in a system where just the fact that she was born to two particular people that made her white puts her in a position of authority, if nothing else. So I'll pass it back over to y'all. I'm sure I'll say something because one of y'all will mess up and I'm gonna have to get in y'all ass or whatever.
Well, let me be the first to mess up then. I would say I like to just use it as saying prejudice, racism is prejudice plus power. And I'm saying that to even go right back to where we started when we talked about Black Power. In talking about Black Power, we was referencing Black Power for Black people. So when you talk about racism from that standpoint, prejudice plus power basically means that you're talking about subjugating other people's ability to live and control their destiny through your hands. And so from that standpoint, you will be stripping Black people of their ability to be in control of their own way of life. So that racism is you know, going back to the concept of colonization from that in that essence, and you're basically making sure you have the final say so, and not only the final but the first, middle, and final say so in terms of how people dictate and maneuver their life, whether it be through subliminal imagery and messaging, whether it be through controlling their educational process so that they do operate as an inferior. So there's so many levels in which racism takes place, to the point to why we had to go back to Black in the first place, because we don't identify ourselves as African, going back to what he talked about with the subculture. So when you talk about racism, we first and foremost have to learn how to escape the idea of individualism and first connect ourselves with some type of reference point, which is why we talk about Black Power. So us as a people have to go back to establishing a community-like perspective in terms of our melatonin, which goes into why we say Black. So from that standpoint, let's identify with something as a collective. And once we identify with that something as a collective, now we need to orchestrate that, and we need to utilize that to create levels of empowerment. So we go from Black Power to dealing with Black nationalism. And then as we go through Black nationalism, again, always knowing that we need to deal with the fact that the people should be in control of their way of life. And when I say all power to the people, we then go dive into Pan-Africanism. And we recognize that as we build upon Black nationalism, us as Africans here in the United States must form our interconnection with the continent, must form our connection with Africans all across the diaspora. So that brings it to what I refer to when I think about all power to the people, is us reconnecting with all forms of our people across the diaspora.
You need to quit laying down on your microphone.
Yeah, I was just going to say you have a little problem with your sound over there.
Oh, well, that's this part I'm not close enough. I just should said that in the first place. All right.
There you go.
But it comes and goes. That's why I was saying
Okay.
quit laying on it. It was fine, and it kind of get muffled and all of that.
Yeah.
But Dr. Umar Johnson mentions kind of the similar idea that saying, because he was the one I believe coined the phrase unapologetically African, and he talks about how that became unapologetically Black, because even within the struggle community we have a problem with Africa. So while identifying as Black is a good step as a rebellion from whiteness, and defining ourselves and holding the line and saying, this is where we draw the line, to hell with y'all type of thing, it's still, it's a step in the process.
I want to add to your breakdown and build on racism. As you were saying earlier, and as Ward just said, that racism is prejudice plus power. That's one of the things I used to hear Dr. Khalid Abdul Muhammad say all the time, that racism is prejudice plus power, and that white supremacy and racism are interchangeable. The terms are interchangeable. What's the name of the book that the brother, the color code? What's the name of the book? You know the book.
United Code Compensatory Concept.
There you go.
There you go. The whole title. I have to.
Neely Fuller.
Racism, white supremacy.
Yeah, that's a good book to read to understand that concept a whole lot better. And another one, again, we can go back to Broader Fire, because in the Broader Fire, Tony Broader explains racism like this. He says that the term racism was first developed and organized by Dr. Frederick Blumenbach in Gottenham, Germany. And he said that he divided the different groups of people on the planet into basically 4 groups. He said that there are only, 5 groups. There are only 5 groups, and he defined them by color. He said that they are white, yellow, brown, red, and black. And according to him, the darkest colors are the most inferior, and the lightest colors are the most superior, which essentially meant that that created a burden on white people to civilize all other people. And the justification for slavery and colonialism and imperialism that whites had been exercising over the planet, they were doing their God-given duty to civilize the darker colors of people, according to Frederick Blumenbach. And that's where the whole concept and ideal of racism came from. And that's why the concept of white supremacy and racism is interchangeable. Brother War said that racism is prejudice plus power. It means that I prejudge a particular group of people based on the color of their skin, and I have the power to oppress that group of people politically, educationally, economically, on every level in the political spectrum. And one of the things Dr. Khalid used to say is that Black people do not have that type of power anywhere on the planet, so therefore we can't be racist. And that's the understanding of Neely Fuller said in the book, the long title that the brother just recited. I haven't read the book in a long time. There you go.
You got that original copy too.
Yeah, it's old. It's old, but still it's useful.
Yeah. One of the first things that was said was that if you don't understand what racism is, then you would not be able to understand anything else. And that's was it in that book, or was that in
yeah. Until you understand racism, white supremacy, what it is and how it works, everything else that you think you understand will only serve to confuse you.
There you go. He got it down pat. I knew we kept you around for some reason.
And the ISIS papers.
Yeah, and the ISIS papers. That's what I was looking for. Those are 2 good books to read to understand the concept of racism deeper. Because as Brother E said, a lot of time and then while we doing these definitions, a lot of times we have a false understanding of what racism is. And as Brother E was just saying earlier, I used to tell brothers this in prison a lot. I used to tell them that the average white guy that's in prison with us that don't like Black people is not racist. He's not a racist. He has absolutely no power whatsoever. The fact that we make up at the time, I believe it's 12 or 14% of the country, or make up 30-some% of the people that are incarcerated for crimes is racism. White people on average are charged with more crimes than we are, and they're arrested for more crimes than Black people are, but Black people are convicted for more crimes than white people are. And this is This is a Department of Justice statistics. That's racism. And the reason for that is, as Brother E was saying about the white woman in the park, is that when I or Brother Ward go to court and we stand before a white judge, when he looks at us, all he sees is a perpetrator of somebody who has perpetrated a crime. When Billy goes before this white judge, the white judge can look at him and see his grandson. He can see a reflection of his own son. He can see reflections of his own self. So therefore, he has a little bit more mercy, a little bit more leniency. Even myself, to use that pork experience that Brother E used, I had to say a similar experience at work, where I had a conflict with this insanely crazy white guy, little bitty white guy, and it was only he and I in the building. And then we went to the supervisor the next day to tell what happened. The supervisor believed him over me. And, the guy was lying. And I could not understand why this, for a small moment in life, I had a lapse of judgment and forgot where the hell I was at. So I could not understand why they believed this guy over me.
You thought you was free.
Yeah, I don't know what I was thinking about. And later, the guy come to me trying to apologize. Little bitty white guy always wear this cross around his neck, which is another aspect of racism, but he always wear this cross around his neck. And he say, I'm not who you think I am. And I say, what I don't understand, just get to the point, is how, if I've been here 3 years and you only been here 3 months, why did they take your word over mine? He say, well, look at us. He said, you're a big old black guy. I'm a little white guy. Of course they believed me. And he knew this, he understood this, and that those are aspects of racism in itself. And as Brother E compared racism to socialism, not saying that they are the same thing, but understanding what an ism is. An ism is a system of beliefs and ideals. Racism is an ideology. And that ideology is woven into the fabric of America. America's father is white supremacy and his mother is racism. America was founded on the exploitation of the red man and the enslavement of the black man. America was founded on these ideas, and America justified its behavior completely on racism. And so that culture of racism is in every aspect of this system. It's so deep that not only does this system create that bigotry in the minds of white people, it creates it in black people. And I'm not talking about black, quote unquote, what they call reverse racism. Black people, for the most part, unless you're conscious and then became more aware of who we are and what we've given to the planet, black people believe that black people are inferior. We believe that we're less than. We believe that we don't have the same skills and ability that other people have. We as a people, as a group, we really believe that. I used to get into debates and discussions all the time, and if I quote a black author, oh, no, they wouldn't accept it. I had to start reading a whole lot of white authors to be able to take those white authors for them to accept the information, and that is that's a remnant or a fallout of that racist system that we've been educated by.
The African people in this country, well, globally, but especially here, absolutely 100% believe in the inferiority of ourselves and others and view one another as a threat. They still do that I forget the name of it, and the brother that put together the test, but the doll test with the little girls, where they'll show her, a white doll and a black doll, and she'll choose to play with the white doll because the black doll is ugly or dirty or what have you. So it's still this deep-seated notion on good times. You go back to the old good times with Black Jesus. Florida, the mother, they had a white Jesus up, and Michael, the little militant boy, wanted to put up a picture of a Black Jesus, understandably, but she was having none of it because white Jesus is the Jesus. That's who Jesus is. And so we identify with Jesus, the Son of God, must look like God. So God is white, so we're automatically starting out from that, underneath. And Ishaka Musa Barashango goes into some of that in some of his books. But the holidays, since the holidays, so-called holy days, holidays, just getting through them, and God getting through them once again. We Thanksgiving is a celebration of the enemy's conquering of a people. You're celebrating these white folks coming in and decimating these indigenous folks, so-called Indians, and the beginning of the enslavement of our people. And so, having a white guy, slide down your chimney and deliver packages and whatnot. If it was a brother coming into your house some kind of way, you'd be trying to call the cops, but because supposedly it's this white guy coming down the chimney, it's all good. Bouncing all of that garbage. All of that is racism based on white supremacist ideology that works and has worked, continues to work to keep ourselves in. And I like the example of because I had to do the same thing to study, or at least get sound bites from white authors, white folks, period, to give some legitimacy to whatever your argument is, because we are we've been so fucked up in the head with this shit that we honestly cannot conceive of Black folk being, Naim Akbar talks about it, of Black folk being able to tell us anything about us. It has to come from white folks for it to be true. Naim Akbar is like a preeminent, one of the top scholars in the world dealing with Black African psychology. But he still runs into the same thing. Black folk love to say, you can't tell me anything about me, when in reality, yeah, he can, because it's not, and that's that ego. We get past the arrogance of it and stand back and truly look at the picture. We're able to see that, there's a whole lot of this stuff that's applicable. It's a whole lot of it that's on point, and it's a whole lot of it that initially will make me feel like a fool, as I begin to acknowledge and accept that things are the way that they are. But I think that's probably the most profound effect of racism, white supremacy, is that we don't have any confidence in ourselves to even talk about ourselves and believe that we could be right about ourselves when that right stuff doesn't make us feel good.